Hello Internet, welcome back to the Bits of Good Bootcamp. I am Ben, Chili Dog with Fries Holmes, and in this video we're going to be going a little bit deeper on React state management. And in this video we're actually going to be working off of a project off of GitHub instead of our normal routine of using StackBlitz links and CodePen links, because I want to get you guys a little bit more familiar with how to take things down from GitHub and also how to push code up to GitHub. We're not going to be dealing with the latter until our first project, but for this I just wanted you to be able to visit a repository and clone it onto your machine. So you'll see in front of me the link that you should see in the Notion and also in the description of this video in order to see all the source code for this. You'll see in the README are some instructions on how to get this project started. But first we're going to get it on our machines. You can download the zip file if you want to, if you just want the source code for it and follow along that way. Or if you want to brush up on Git a little bit, make sure you know how to use it in the command line and clone a repo as a local directory on your machine. Just follow along with me here. I'm going to be doing it that way. So first, I'm going to open the terminal application. This is what you'll use on Mac. On Windows, you'll open Command Prompt or PowerShell, whichever you're comfortable with. And this will just launch us into our base directory. As always, either type ls on macOS or dir on Windows in order to make sure of exactly where you are. All this is going to do is it's going to print all of the folders inside the current folder you're in, so you sort of get a lay of the land and you know where you are. In this case, I can see I'm in my base folder. That's what this tilde means right here. And in this list, we can see all the folders we can jump into. In this case, I want to clone all of the code for this into my documents folder, and I want to create a specific directory for the Varsity menu project. So for that, first I'm going to jump into the documents folder, use CD in order to navigate to a directory. The / is optional. And you'll see I have some autocomplete here that will not be on your machine, but if you want to hit tab in order to autocomplete for you, that's really helpful in order to see if you're typing out the correct directory name. If it autocompletes for you, that means you're all good. So we jumped into our documents folder, and now I'm going to run the clone command using the git command line tool. So what we're going to do is we're going to type git clone and then paste in the web link that we just copied from this dropdown. You can click this in order to copy it. Once we do this, oh shoot, I actually already had it on my machine from the last demo I did. So normally here, I'm going to remove that folder. And this is the command to remove folders, by the way, rm-rf. And that'll take a minute in order to remove. See, that's done. So now I'm going to reclone this onto my device. Now, inside of my documents folder, I should have something called Varsity Menu State Management. And in order to make sure of that, we're going to head over to our VS Code. We're going to whip up a new project here, or just an empty window. And then I'm just going to hit Command O or Control on Windows in order to open a file. And I'm going to head over to my documents folder, and I'm going to click on Varsity Menu State Management. And when I hit open, that will pull up that directory inside of VS Code. And we can see all of the code associated with this guy. We can walk through this a little bit, but the only things that we're going to be looking at are the menu and menu item files. Okay. And we can see our README again that we were just viewing in GitHub. It's a little bit more ugly here, so I'm actually going to head back to my web browser to make sure of how to run this thing. It looks like the script in order to do so is just npm start, which will start the project. And you'll also see the page will reload as you make edits. So whenever you save a file, it's going to reload the web page and put all of the code that you just typed onto what's currently running. So you don't have to stop and start every time you save changes. So that's pretty neat. So we're just going to go ahead and get this project running. So for that, I'm actually going to open a terminal. There is a keyboard shortcut for this, but you'll hit the terminal drop down along the top here. And I'm going to click on New Terminal in order to pull that up inside of here. To avoid any confusion, this is literally just the terminal application that we just had open. It's exactly the same thing. It's just now it's inside of your editor. So now you don't have to do the weird like Alt-Tab between your terminal and back to your code in order to make sure everything's running correctly. It's basically just taking that terminal app and putting it inside of VS Code. And you also see it'll put us inside of the directory that we're working on. So we don't have to CD in order to get to where we need to go. So from here, the first thing I have to do before running any of those scripts is I have to install all of the dependencies. Don't forget this step. If you forget it, it's not going to run correctly because React and all of its dependencies will not be inside of the project, which means it won't have the resources in order to start the React project. And I'm just rambling here a little bit because it's going to take a while to install this. React is a very large library. And it'll just go through all of these, no vulnerabilities as we would expect. And now we're going to run that script that we saw inside of our README in order to get it running. So once you run this, it's actually going to pull it up inside of your browser. Here I actually have an app running already. Just as a refresher, the port is basically the specific. So you see here, I actually have I have another application running on port 3000. This will come up if you are running a separate application using localhost, or maybe you have another React app open, and it's conflicting with what's already running there. But thankfully, React just lets you put it on a different port automatically. So I'm going to hit Y here in order to do that. And you'll see it'll pop open in my browser. Instead of running on 3000, it's now running on 3001 because 3000 was taken by another app that I'm running separately. But don't worry about that too much. Basically, just copy the URL that it tells you inside of the command line, or just wait for it to pop up in your browser automatically. Here we can see the exact web link to go to. So I'm going to head back over to Chrome. And we'll see here is something very familiar to you. It's the exact same app that we made with CSS a long time ago. But in this case, it's actually rebuilt using ReactJS. And it has one important change that we're going to address for this activity. We have a show receipt button down at the bottom here. If we click on it, it'll pull up this little receipt view with your order and a blank space below that. And we're going to fill this in with the items that we've selected off of this menu. So now we're turning this menu into something interactable, where when we click on an element, we'll be able to add it to our orders that we've selected, and it'll pop up in here. So the first thing we need to do is make sure that when you click on an order, it'll actually register that you clicked on it. In this case, we're going to add a yellow background whenever we click on an element so that it shows us a little feedback on whether or not we've selected it yet. And the second thing we're going to do is once we've selected an element, we're going to throw it onto our receipt in order to have a list of all of the things that we've selected. Say if we had like a checkout flow, so people could actually like order online or something. This would be the first step to that. So this takes us back to the code. We're going to walk through this a little bit, step by step together. So we see a bunch of extraneous files in here. Don't worry about many of these except app.js. An index is just going to import our app, and it's going to run the render function that we went over a little while ago, which basically just renders that component to the page. And then every time we want it to change, we would use either a state variable or we would run this render function again. In our case, we're just going to use state variables in order to have it re-render our app. So this is the app that's actually running here. And it's very simple. It just imports a couple of other components to throw on the page. It's using a main container, which you usually use for the main content on your page that doesn't contain the footers and headings and all of that. So in here, we're just rendering three components: our header component, combo banner, and the menu. And we'll see a one-to-one here. If we head back to Chrome, this is the header, this is the combos, and this is our menu right here. So head back to the code. All of these components are inside of the components folder, as we can see based on all of these imports. The components folder being this guy. This is a typical way to organize your React app. When it's very small. You usually want to have all of the main parts of your source outside of the components folder, this being the main application, whatever's rendering that application, and whatever CSS you need, or these extra files like service workers, which you don't have to worry about, or the logo that's being shown, image assets, whatever you need. And the rest of it is just going to be a set of components. We do not need to worry about that yet. So inside of components, we have the rest of the things rendered to our page. In this case, we have the combo banner, which is a collection of paragraphs listed side by side. We have our header component, which just has an H1 inside of it. We have our menu, and this is the most complex part. It has the list of objects, each representing one of the menu items. Like here we have a chili dog item with the price and the picture, and each of those gets thrown on the page using a menu item component. And then this is another file that we're going to work with in order to give us our yellow background button feedback. But basically, the flow that we're looking at here is we're going through our list of menu items, which is a list of objects. And then we use the map function, as we went over previously, in order to go over each element in there and then create a menu item component for each element in our array. and then we pass to our component all of the attributes of this object. So we go over each item in our array, we create a menu item, and we tell that menu item, this is your name, this is your price, and this is your picture. And those are each being pulled off of the object inside of our list. So when we head over to menu item, we should expect to see the props being used, and in this case, yep, we see props is being passed to our component function. And inside of here, we're getting the name, price, and picture that was just passed to us. And then we're setting the text for the image to the name of the item, just for simplicity's sake. And everything is wrapped in a button so that we can actually listen for click events and change the color of our menu item depending. And that's about it. Everything has been accounted for here. So first we're going to be working on the menu item component, which is going to be each one of these little panels here. And each of those are being styled just using a big CSS file that's imported into our app. And this is just being applied to all components. Because remember, if you write a CSS file, it's going to cascade down to every component and subcomponent and so on. It's just going to apply to everything inside of app. So it's totally safe to just write all of your styles inside of here. But we'll work on a better solution for that in the future. But for now, we're going to do our first activity. This is very simple, so try it on your own. I actually put the code in order to complete this just below this video inside the Notion if you want to whip through that one really quick and get to the meat of this video, which is the second half. But for this, all we want to do is we want to go ahead and change the color of our button depending on whether or not it has been clicked. So for this, you're going to need a state variable to keep track of whether or not it is on. We're actually going to use a toggle for this, which basically means every time I click on it, I want it to turn yellow. And then when I click on it again, I want to unselect it or change it back to white. AKA just apply a CSS class that makes it yellow and then remove that CSS class when we click on it a second time. It's going to be a toggle, just like the projects that we've been working on previously. So you're going to be changing what's in this class attribute based on a state variable that you need to define up here. And as always, don't forget, you're going to need to now have a return statement on the top of this, and this will all be wrapped in parentheses and returned from our function. And the reason for this is now we have to remove our implicit return that we were using previously, where we were just able to omit the curly braces in the return and just return everything inside of here. Now we have some code that we want to write before we return the HTML. We want to add our state variable up here. So don't forget to do that. And as always, don't forget, this should not be curly braces. It's very easy to just get tripped up and think you need curly braces here. You actually need parentheses because you're just returning whatever's inside of them. You're not declaring a function or anything. So work on that yourself. See if you can get that working. And for reference, there's already a CSS class written in order to change the background color to yellow. And you can find it inside of here. The selected class is what you're going to want to apply. So you want to change the CSS in order to add the selected class in order to change the background. All right, head back here in order to see how the solution would work. All right, welcome back. So we're going to rip through this one pretty quickly here. It shouldn't be too complicated. It's very similar to the one that we did previously. So all we're going to want to do is first we're going to create our state variable where the first item is going to be the value of our state variable, and the second one is going to be the function we use to change that value. And whenever we pass in this function is what this value should become. And we're going to set that equal to react.useState. And the initial value is going to be false because we want to say it's not selected at first. And then we're going to create our button function that's going to toggle our selected on and off. Nothing's going to be passed into this. We just want to set selected to the opposite of what it is currently. So exclamation point selected in order to get the opposite value of this Boolean as it stands. Next, we're going to add our onClick to this button in order to call a function whenever we click on it. And curly brackets because we're inserting a JavaScript value here, in this case our toggle selected function. And I'm just going to paste that into here. So now every time we click, we should be able to set selected to the opposite of what it is right now. And the last thing we want to do is change the CSS class depending on the value selected. So for that, I'm going to use our old friend, the ternary operator. And we're going to say if it is selected, we want our CSS to be menu item selected. And if it's not selected, we just want our style to be menu item, like so. And that should be everything we need in order to get this guy working. So we're going to head back over here and make sure of that. And sure enough, we see our background color change to yellow, and it changes back to white when we unselect it. And now we have a nice JavaScript variable in order to see whether or not we've selected it. So now comes the more difficult part, where we want to update the orders that are listed inside of our receipt, depending on whether or not we have selected an item. And this is going to involve managing state inside of our menu component, and then telling our menu item how to update that state. But before we jump into that, first I just want to go over how the receipt component actually works. So we'll see here, there's already a prop declared here, where an empty array is passed in. And this is a list of purchased items. And this is just going to be a list of everything that we have selected right now in order to purchase. So I'm going to jump into the receipt component here. And fancy shortcut, by the way, if you hold down the Command key on Mac or the Control key on Windows, you'll see this little hyperlink pop up. And you'll actually be able to click on a component in order to open that file, which is really slick. Alternatively, the receipt.js file is inside of our components folder. You just navigate to it that way. So we see here all of the code in order to get our receipt component working, and how that purchase items prop is being used. So before I move on, I actually suggest you pause the video here and just take a look at the receipt component's syntax and see if you can just make heads or tails of how it's actually working, and then reference what's going on in Chrome if you're confused about what's going on, so that you can sort of see how is our button showing and hiding our component, and also what is it doing with purchased items, and what prop might you want to pass in order to populate this list correctly. All right, hopefully you spent some time to take a look at that. So I'm just going to jump through this here. First, what we'll notice at the top is we're creating a state variable that's very similar to the one we used inside of menu item, that should just toggle on and off depending on whether we want to show our receipt. So first we create a very simple state variable. It's a showing variable with a function in order to change it, and the initial value is false, so we have an idea this is probably going to be a Boolean. Next we have our function that we pass to our button whenever we click on it, in order to toggle our set showing on or off. And we should see the text of it is show receipt, so it's probably something to do with this show receipt at the bottom, which is toggling our CSS class on and off. In this case, our CSS class is the showing class that's being applied to the section. And then the next thing that it's doing is it's looping over all of the elements and purchase items, and it is creating a receipt item. So this is something that we don't see currently because we're not passing anything in the purchase items array. But if we were, what it would expect for each item is, first of all, we can see it's using dot in order to get each attribute of it. So it's probably an array of objects that it's expecting. And it looks like each object needs to have a name and a price on it in order for it to display. So overall, we're seeing that the purchase item prop that we're passing in needs to be an array of objects, and each object needs to have a name and a price in order for it to display. And you also see here it's using a DL, which is another type of list. It's very similar to the UL or the unordered list that we were using previously, except instead of having just a list item or an LI, it actually has two attributes for each list item. It has a title, a DT, and a description. So this is a very convenient way to create a list where you have two text fields that you want to display. In this case, we have a name and a price for each list item. So that's why we're using a DL here. So we're actually going to check out how this guy is working. So I'm just going to pass in a dummy object into this. So we're passing in an empty array now. So I'm going to put an object in this array with a name of, say, chili dog is the item that we're looking at. And then I'm going to pass it a price field, which should also be a string. Say it's a really expensive hot dog. And if we head back over to Chrome, we should be able to see that item pop up when we click show receipt. And sure enough, we see our chili dog and the price listed here. So now we have a good handle on how this guy works. So now comes the tricky part. How are we going to keep track of all of the items that we've clicked on when the menu item has access to the button click? And we need that menu item to tell the menu component about which items we've selected so that it can update the receipt. Well, in order to do that, we're going to use something called lifting state up. And it's a pretty simple concept. We're basically just taking a state variable that multiple components need access to and putting it inside of their parent component. So what do I mean by a parent component? Well, if we look at menu, we can say that it is the parent component for the two child components that are declared inside of it. In this case, receipt and menu item are both declared inside of menu, and they're rendered inside of the menu's render function. So because of that, we would say that menu is the parent of menu item and receipt. So based on this, we now know the parent that both of our components share that need access to the list of purchase items. In this case, receipt needs access to purchase items so that it can display them, display the value of that state variable as an array. And menu item needs access to it so that it can update the value of that array to add new elements to it and also remove whenever we unselect. So based on that, it's safe to say that we can create our state variable inside of menu. And I'm going to do that just like we did for our other state variables. In this case, I'm going to call it purchase items for clarity's sake. And I'm going to add our set set function. And I'm going to set that equal to React use state and set its initial value to an empty array because we want to say we haven't purchased anything yet until we start clicking on stuff. So the procedure for receipt is pretty simple because we already have everything built out to read in purchase items as a prop. So we can actually just pass our state variable directly as a prop to receipt. And then whenever purchase items changes, it's going to change the prop that's passed to receipt, and receipt is going to update as well. So all of that re-rendering stuff is going to be done for you. You just have to pass the state variable as a prop, and it'll all work. The slightly more complicated part is how are we going to update that state by changing the method that is used by the button inside of menu item. Well, thankfully, JavaScript allows us to pass both variable values like arrays or objects and also function values. So in this case, set purchase items is just a traditional function that we can call in order to change the value of purchase items. And we can pass that function as a prop directly to menu item in order for it to update the value. In this case, we're going to do a little bit more than that. We're actually going to wrap purchase items in another function that's going to manage the appending of the purchase item to our purchase items array. And then we're going to pass that helper function down to our menu item so that the button toggle method that's being called right now, just to change the color, it can also call this set state function in order to update our state variable. So let's walk through that step by step. First, I'm going to create our method in order to update purchase items. I'm just going to call it update purchase items. And it's just going to be a simple Lambda function. And what's passed into it is what our menu item needs to pass into that function in order to tell us, hey, this is the menu item that you're clicking on. This is the name and price that I know about that I can tell you. So in this case, what we're expecting is an object with a name and a price. And we're going to take that object and put it in our purchase items array. So in this case, it's going to just be a purchased item. And that's going to be an object with 2 keys on it that we can expect. So that's our function. And what we need to do is we need to take that item and put it at the end of our purchase items array. So we're going to call set purchase items in order to update that value. And we're going to use something called the spread operator, which you can review on your own. It's basically just taking all the value inside of purchase items and it's unwrapping them. So it's taking all the values out of that array and it's putting them inside of this new array that we're declaring outside of it. So we're taking all the values of purchase items, we're throwing them in a new array, and on the end of that new array, we want to put our new purchase item. So that's it. Now purchase items is going to be equal to whatever's in there right now plus this new purchased item. And that's it. That's all we need to do in order to update our array. So we can pass this function now as a prop down to menu item so I can call it in order to update the set of purchase items. So I'm just going to call it update purchase items. That's the name of the prop. And I'm going to set it equal to our function. Remember not to put the open close parentheses here because we're not calling this function inside of here. We're actually just trying to pass a reference to this function so that inside a menu item, it'll be able to get access to that function and call it whenever the button is pressed. So don't call it with the open close parentheses, just pass the name of the function. So I'm going to head over to menu item now. And from here, we can access our update, update purchase items off of the props that were passed down. So inside of toggle selected, we're just going to keep this because this is what changes the background color. And above that, I'm going to put props.update, what was the name of it? Update purchased items. I'm going to call update purchased items, and I'm going to pass to it an object. And in that object is going to be the name of the element, and that's going to be off of the props and the price, which is also going to be off of the props that were passed down to this component. So there we go. Now we've created our object and we passed it up to our state function. That's going to update the state for us when it's given that item. It's a pretty simple procedure. You're going to be doing this very often whenever you need state shared among multiple components. You just pass down the function directly in order to update the state, and you pass the state variable as if it was just a regular old prop variable. So if we head back over to Chrome, we should be able to, again, click and unclick, and we'll see the background change as we expect. But we'll also see our show receipt update with all of the items that we've selected. In this case, it's going to add to the end of the array no matter what, whether we clicked it on or we clicked it off. So in this case, it's just going to add it a bunch of times. But if I click on this one a couple times, I click on this one 3 times, we should expect to see this guy, and then this guy twice, and this guy 3 times in our list. And sure enough, we see that it was adding to our state variable every time. And it's updating the value that we received without having to refresh the page, call a render function, or anything. It just takes care of it for us. React understands that we're updating a state variable, and it reloads everything accordingly. So this is great, but we have that one flaw that I just mentioned where instead of being able to select as many times as you want something, we're saying you can only have one of each item, which isn't super realistic, but for the sake of this example, we'll say we can only toggle things on and off. And what we want to do is when we select something, we want to add to our menu, as we're doing right now, but then when we unselect, we want it to remove from our order receipt. So how are we going to do that? Well, this is going to be an activity for you to figure out. But the first hint that I'll give you is we're going to need another function here that we're going to pass to this, where this function is actually adding a purchased item. So maybe we should change that for clarity's sake. Add purchased item. And we'll change that inside of menu item as well, since we'll need another function that we'll use to remove a purchased item, and we'll pass that as a separate prop to our menu item. So this is going to be called remove purchase item. And what we need to do is figure out how we can remove an item in order to just get which item is inside of the array and pull it out of there. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to do it by the item name, because every item on here has a unique name, as I'm sure you can see. And because we're only allowing purchase of one item on each receipt, it's safe to say that we shouldn't expect multiple items with the same name on the receipt. So we can identify which item you unselected by its name. So based on that, we would say that the menu item is going to tell us the name of whatever item we just unselected. And based on that, we're going to remove the item with that name from our list of purchase items. So try to figure out how to do that on your own. As a hint, I would suggest using the filter function. So like we've been using the map function before, now try and use the filter function on purchase items in order to filter out everything that doesn't have this name. Okay, hopefully you took some time to try that on your own. So I'm going to whip through this solution here. So we're going to use our set purchase items, as you would expect. And what we're going to do is we're going to set it to purchased items with this name filtered out of it. We're going to try to remove anything with that matching name, which should only be one element. But with the filter function, we can go ahead and just remove one element or multiple. So with this, we're going to take our item, that's what the callback gives us, and we're going to return whether or not that item should be inside of our list. In this case, we want it to be in our list if it doesn't match the name. And we want it to be excluded from our list when it does match the name, because that means it's something we unselected. So based on that, we can just return from this Lambda function the result of whether or not name is equal to the purchased item's name. So I'm just going to say if name is not equal to the item's name, then we want it to be in our new list. And that's about it. That's all we need to do. Purchased items, plural. And that should remove everything that we need to remove. So all we have to do now is pass this down as a prop to our menu items component. I'm going to call it exactly what the callback function is called. I'm going to head over here, and we're going to base it on whether or not it is selected currently. So if we clicked on toggle and it's not currently selected, that means that we are trying to select it. So based on that, we know that we need to call add purchase item whenever we're toggling it on. Otherwise, we're probably toggling it off. So in that situation, we want to call props.remove purchase item. And all we need to pass to that is props.name, so that it knows which one to remove from our list. And that should be all we need in order to get this working. So if I click on this and I click on it again, we should see an empty list in here now, and certainly we do. So I'm going to click on a couple of these. We should see all of those go in our list. Awesome. And I'm just going to select or unselect completely random ones here, the second and third. And now we should see just these two items, the chili dogs and chicken sandwich. So everything is working perfectly. Now we can select and unselect, and we're also able to lift the state up so that both the receipt and the menu item could have access to the list of purchase items. So that's a very basic example of lifting state up. Next time we're going to talk a little bit more about how to share state with components that are many levels deep using something called a global state variable using React context.